da 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 la la da 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 da. Hello, my friends. I am back. I am back after a little time away. A little change, a little growth, a little pain, a little pleasure. And so it goes on and on, you know. Where am I? It's a difficult question. Emerged from the tower, having grown more human, my cold and lifeless skin feeling blood pump within it for the first time in some time. In fact, the skin is new. I had to grow it back first after having no form, of course. It's been a journey, a process. You've either been here for it or not, and I've no patience tonight to regale you yet again about the many different forms I've taken. But all that is to say that now my skin seems to have formed, and it seems to have blood pumping within it. There is a heart beating within me. Fast, fast, ever faster. Air is something I seem to need, indeed. My teeth are not very sharp, but they long to bite and chew and eat. And my face seems to have a few lines across it. My hair has some white within it, too. Yet I don't think I've ever felt younger, somehow. What an interesting process it is, becoming human. In fact, I wish I'd done it sooner, truly. It really is something to wake up to life. I hold a hand that I am afraid will hurt me. He's done it in the past. He, too, has taken many forms. So he always will. We are not just one, each and every one of us, feminine or masculine or neither or both. We are never just the one form. We will go through many. And I think we just need to realize that we're doing it together. Even if it feels as though it is with separate little individuals here and there. We are all growing together, aren't we? I hold the warm hand tightly as we walk forward through daylight and evening, storm and sun, hot and cold. And I'm sure that if we looked closely enough, we would see our faces shifting, our eyes changing, even in our humanity, perhaps especially in our humanity. But that's all right. The journey is not for us to narrow down into one form, one self, one version, but to expand outwards in a great burst of formlessness. How lovely it is to have a chance to explore a human form for even just a little. How lovely it is to have a chance to do it with you. You may be surprised, my friend, listening as I walk along my strange journey away from the tower. Slowly but surely. It surely seems to be going slowly, as it doesn't seem to be growing that much farther away from me in the distance behind me. Yet I need to trust that it is. That is, you may be surprised to hear that I have a story for you. It is a story about remembering the extent of what we are. Once upon a time, there was a goddess. Wait, scratch that. That's already too much information. There was a woman. She found herself awake quite suddenly on a secluded road in a rural town not too far from wherever it is that you are now. She found herself awake quite suddenly, I say, because she had no recollection of who she was, where she was, or how she had gotten there. She seemed to be clothed in some kind of black fabric that was torn and burnt up. Her long, dark hair was frayed and frazzled and fried, too, a little burnt on the edges, smelling of smoke. She had a horrible, throbbing pain in her head, and when she raised a shaking hand to touch it, there was blood on her fingertips. She was terribly hurt, and she had no memory whatsoever of, well, anything. And here she was, on the stinking tar of an asphalt road on a cool summer evening, only the thin moon above her in a clouded sky, offering her little light. And she heard something coming from the trees. A terrible sound, something sighing, something laughing, something watching her. More of them on the other side. They were all around her. Her vision was blurred, her head aching, but she thought she saw red orbs moving, growing larger as they grew closer. And ahead of her, one walked toward her on the road. It was a tall, gangly thing, thin and dark, its face long and its mouth open impossibly wide as it looked at her hungrily. It staggered to her on legs that seemed to detest moving on this surface. Its legs were crooked backwards like a bird's, its feet walking on tiptoe, its spine contorting and writhing as though it hated the very atmosphere all around it. More of them came from the forest on either side of her, some that looked like this one, others quite different but no less terrible. Some had blood weeping from their eyes. Others had skin a terrible sickly white. Some had those great yawning mouths, while others had no mouths at all, and seemed to scream behind the sewed-up flesh where there ought to be one. All of them looked at her. All of them approached her with reaching hands and cackling voices and sobbing gasps. She screamed out for help. She screamed out for anyone. And someone came. A car came screeching down the road and plowed into the one creature in the middle of it. It halted abruptly, tires shrieking, stopping just short of hitting our hero, who was still screaming. "Are you all right? What are you doing there?" A voice called out as a man exited the vehicle. A strange kind of vehicle that she did not recognize at all. "You killed it," she shuddered, gasping in complete shock. "Help me. I need help, please. Please." The man ran to her side and helped her up. He was kind. He was gentle. He helped her into his vehicle. And off they drove. He hadn't seen the thing he hit. She insisted there was a ghoulish monster approaching her. While he did not argue, he did not believe her. He hadn't even felt the car strike anything. He'd only stopped because he saw a helpless woman in the middle of the road. She held her secret in her heart. But as they drove on, she saw red eyes flashing by her in the woods on either side of the highway. And she knew the things were not gone. The man took her to a hospital. They tended to her injury. Yes, she had amnesia. She seemed to have suffered a great fall. Though her hair and clothes were burnt, her skin, however, was not, somehow. She was fortunate. She did not remember anything. They assumed she had perhaps been attacked and left for dead in the middle of nowhere. They offered her help in finding somewhere safe to go, somewhere with kind people. But the man who saved her readily offered to care for her, to watch her, to keep her safe, if she agreed. She did, though she wasn't really focusing on the conversation. She was focusing instead on the red eyes from behind different hospital room doors, the long and frightening fingers sliding under those doors, trying to reach her, the ones following behind nurses here and there, trying to get to her, yet none daring get close enough to reach out or strike. They just watched her. They tried to reach her, but nothing more. She went home with the kind man who'd saved her. Many of us might say that was unwise, but many of us have also known what it is to be so vulnerable, so afraid, so lost, that you would fall into the arms of the first kind soul you find who is willing to offer you a degree of care. Kindness, it seems, can be a powerful thing, and maybe not always a virtuous thing, interestingly enough. Weeks passed, and she learned a little about this world. The man who cared for her grew more and more frustrated, however, because while she was learning, it seemed she was not remembering. She did not understand what microwaves and televisions and cars and YouTube was. She did not seem to have any grasp whatsoever of what money was. She didn't really understand food either, nor did she have much interest in it. Sleep wasn't something she wanted or enjoyed. And while she accepted affection, there was a kind of fire in her eyes whenever he pushed his luck a little too far. A darkness lying behind them that told him he must take great care so as not to awaken the wrong thing within this strange woman. But what he disliked the most was the way she looked at the windows in his house. She seemed to see things moving. She followed things that were clearly not there. Sometimes she would gasp or shriek. Sometimes she would slam doors or bare her teeth. She insisted for the first while that there were monsters, ghouls, nightmarish things all around her, reaching for her, watching her. But he did not see them. So she stopped mentioning it. And, truth be told, he was afraid of the invisible things he didn't believe in. Sometimes his hands would reach for her with too much familiarity, or his lips would come close to her skin, but she would sharply look over his shoulder and gasp, and he would immediately stop. Not for her sake, but for his own fear. Remember what I said about kindness and virtue. One day, they were out buying groceries. Such a simple thing. He was muttering a little about not being able to afford groceries for two for much longer. And she simply replied without affectation that he needn't buy any food for her, as she did not desire or seem to require it. But he scoffed and once again refused to believe her. He was growing tired of her. Impatient. Maybe even unkind. An old woman was looking at tomatoes in the vegetable aisle. She looked up and saw the woman. The woman whose hair was short now, as she'd cut off the burnt ends. She was wearing a sweater and jeans instead of her burnt black robes. Yet her eyes were dark and clear and darting around the shop, ever vigilant for those nightmares. The old woman dropped a tomato and fell to her knees. Mistress, mistress, oh glorious one, oh bless me, bless me, bless me, she muttered over and over. The woman arched an eyebrow, but she did not stop her, because, for the first time since she'd woken up on that road, she felt something familiar. She placed a gentle hand on the top of the woman's head. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, mistress, the old lady whispered, tears in her eyes. Please, how can I find you again? How will I see you? At that moment, the man rudely pulled the woman away. He whispered that the old woman was clearly crazy and ought to be left alone. But in a voice that he did not recognize, and which struck a terrible chord of fear in the pit of his stomach, she uttered one phrase to the woman on the ground. My child, you may come to me on the full September moon, at the place where dream and waking collide. And the woman sobbed and nodded and clapped her hands together in prayer. The man took the dark-eyed, forgetful woman back home and said nothing to her for the rest of the night. Over the next week before the full moon, the man asked her about what she'd said. He asked her about the place where dream and waking collide. She just looked him deeply in the eyes, as though searching his mind, no, his heart, for a truth that simply was not there. And she said something that was so clearly a lie to both of them, that they both knew it was rooted in the deep truth, that she would not honor him with the true answer. I don't know why I said that. I was just acting crazy. Don't worry. Once or twice, he reached for her in the night. Once or twice, his lips found themselves searching for her skin. But her eyes did not dart rapidly over his shoulder, and she did not gasp. She just held her eyes open wide and looked right at him. And for just a brief moment, he saw the reflection of dozens of red orbs in those dark depths. And he would scream and look over his shoulder, around them in the room in his home. And then, when they found nothing, they would look back to her for answers. And she would just be smiling. She was no longer afraid, but he was petrified. Awake, she would sit all night on the couch in his living room. When he brought up that perhaps she ought to find somewhere else to live or start paying rent, she just said softly, "I will be gone in 1 week. Then I will be gone in 5 days. I will be gone in 3 days. I will be gone tomorrow." And when the full moon finally came, she was true to her word. And he, fortunately for both of them, exited her story. Imagine her on the night of the full moon now. She is standing on the porch of the strange, overly kind at first and now unkind and afraid man's house. She sees hundreds of red eyes all around her, in the trees, on the sidewalks, watching her from windows within homes, their long, spindly fingers reaching out at her. And she is not afraid at all. She begins to hear chanting, singing, a song she knows, a song she knows very well. She follows it. As she walks down the sidewalks, her army of nightmares follows her, and they, with extreme reverence and gentleness, replace her sweater and jeans with long, silky gowns, not burnt, but newly made of the sinew of fear and bravery. They comb out her hair, and though it remains short, a veil of shadow trails along her back, and they even fashioned a black crown for her. She reaches her graceful, lovely hands out to gently touch each of these monsters in gratitude. And as they reach and touch her fingertips, they sigh and sing and delight in the kindness she's shown. This is what they've wanted. This is why they have reached, to touch her, to serve her, the goddess of fear and sleepless nights. To serve her is to be unafraid of anything. To serve her is to be loved by her. And her love is gentle and undemanding. Quiet, not overly kind, but ultimately extremely true. She walks. Some ghouls walk ahead of her and direct her which way to go. This way, mistress, come along. They seem to gesture with their tendril-like fingers. Their eyes are wide with excitement. She finds her way to a particular street, to a particular house, through the side gate to a backyard, where there are candles lit and dozens of people wearing black robes, standing in a circle, waiting for her. The old woman from the grocery store among them. People old and young, from all walks of life, all waiting for her return. They stop singing as soon as she arrives. The nightmares, the ghouls, the monsters join the circle. All is revealed to all. Everyone sees everyone at this lovely and terrible backyard party. All of them fall to their knees before her and weep, laugh, sing, delight in her presence. Half in dream, half awake, the full moon directly overhead. And she takes the time to bless each and all of them with a gentle touch of her hand. And for this night at least, they do not feel fear. They do not feel dread. They do not feel anxiety. And she recognizes in her the fear, the dread, the anxiety that brought her to trust and follow blindly the first human on this strange little plane that offered her the most obvious form of kindness, that demanded her fear, that did not recognize that he stood in the presence of the goddess of fear herself. And she remembers instantly why she decided to fall to earth in the first place. She loved her devotees so very much that she wanted to understand where their fear came from. What drove them to desperation? What made them lock themselves up in chains of their own designs? Or, even worse, succumb to the chains of another who held a very different kind of fear in their hands? And she did understand now. And her blessing, her gentle touch, was all the more magical now. Her tears fell on the faces of each follower, whether ethereal ghoul or earthly human, and they were tears of compassion, for she understood now the depths that fear could drive someone to. They danced under the full moon that night, and when morning came, she returned to her sweater and jeans and left the backyard through the gate and walked down the sidewalk, deciding she might stay here for just a little while longer before returning back home. The realms of fear and the kingdoms of terror would always be there for her. But for now, she had much more to learn. Did you enjoy that story, my friends? Did you enjoy that story, my love? He squeezes his hand a little tighter around mine. A tentative smile from me, from him, and perhaps from you, too. It's a rather probing thing, I think, for me to speculate all of the things each of us does out of fear, the desperation that vulnerability can drive us to. Just remember, fear is not our enemy. Fear is a feeling that can help guide us to truth, to true safety, perhaps, to true power, whatever that may be. I am not afraid of the one who walks beside me. Sometimes I have found some of his forms to be quite frightening. I have found most of my forms to be absolutely dreadful. But fear is not the enemy. Acting out of desire to avoid it, maybe. So, as I move forward, I will not avoid the fear sitting in my heart, but I will squeeze my own hand even more tightly and try to be true to my heart. Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 285 of On a Dark, Cold Night. This is Kristen Zaza, your host, writer, narrator, podcaster, composer, etc. behind the show. And I hope you're doing well this September. I'm doing okay, climbing up out of my fear and taking everything one day at a time as best as I can, at any rate. I feel good. I feel all right. I feel alive. Thank you as always to every single person who supports the show on a monthly basis on Patreon. I'm so grateful to you, my friends. Every supporter of $1 or more a month US gets access to my complete downloadable soundtrack, while every supporter of $5 or more a month US gets that, a monthly tarot reading video uploaded every full moon, and a monthly extra-long podcast episode every new moon. And you also have access to the database of 70 bonus quick moment meditation MIDI. Let me try that again. The database of 70 bonus quick moment meditation mini episodes. Phew. We just had a new moon conversation last week. They're new, they're a lot of fun to make. I take conversations from the community chat for $5 Kindred Spirit patrons only as prompts, as well as DMs from Kindred Spirit patrons. And I just talk about what we're experiencing in terms of astrology, philosophy, spirituality, whatever else that's on my mind or yours, really. It's more conversational than these weekly episodes, more casual but still sleepy and relaxing. And I include music in there as well from On a Dark Cold Night, so I think they're worth checking out. To learn more, visit patreon.com/darkcoldnight. If you want to donate one time only without any perks, you can do so at ko-fi.com/darkcoldnight, or by buying a t-shirt or hoodie at bonfire.com/on-a-dark-cold-night. You can also purchase my book, On a Dark Cold Night, Tales of Loneliness, Creation, and Love on Amazon. It's a collection of 28 of my favorite stories from the podcast, along with a preface, a prologue, and epilogue exclusive to the book. Again, find it on Amazon. You can also search me up at Kristen Zaza. And some of my favorite music from the show is on Spotify or other music streamers as well. You can follow me on Facebook and YouTube under On a Dark Cold Night, Instagram at Dark Cold Night Podcast, or on Blue Sky and TikTok at Kristen Zaza, or on Twitter at A Dark Cold Night. I'd love if you left me a rating or a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever else you like to rate and review podcasts. Thank you so much for listening and being with me, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this one. Stay well, rest well, be well, and talk soon. This podcast has been brought to you by the Sonar Network. Sonar.